The two people on my sides there are Andrew Weissman with the glasses, who was from the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York, and Sam Buell with the red tie from Boston. Both really very top-notch people, and they were pretty representative of who we were able to get, which was great.
One of the prosecutors wrote a book about not just his experience in the Enron prosecutions, but his experience as a prosecutor his whole career. And probably the most shocking revelation in the book was that the decision to use mafia prosecutors rather than white-collar prosecutors in this case was deliberate. And I hadn't really thought about that before. But he said that they chose mafia prosecutors and that he got the job because he was a mafia prosecutor, and that the other prosecutors got their jobs with the Enron task force because they were mafia prosecutors. And these guys, as mafia prosecutors, who have a reputation as being the toughest prosecutors in the Department of Justice, but they personally felt like prior to that, the government had always gone too soft on white-collar criminals. In this book, he actually admits how they use these mafia tactics to flip the one guy to get to the next guy, to get to the next guy, how they use that in the Enron prosecution. Immediately prior to my help on this case, my activity on this case, my work on this case, I worked on a large white-collar prosecution, the defense of a large white-collar prosecution. And so I had experience with those kinds of prosecutors and those kinds of cases. And there's a politeness between the not just the attorneys, but also the investigators and your clients. We say sir, they say sir. But this was a completely different kind of prosecutor. And I'm sure they would say it was a different kind of prosecution, but I don't think that it was. It was a white-collar case. Usually we think of white-collar cases as centering on paper. That's what drives white-collar cases, and that's what proves up white-collar cases. But these prosecutors weren't interested in paper. They weren't interested in interpreting emails or memos that would have been passed around even the upper echelons at Enron. These guys were interested in testimony, stories. What can you say about somebody else? What can you give me on somebody else? And of course, without real paper to back these things up, they're asking you to make up something if you think that it'll help your chances to not be prosecuted. And so they skipped right into cajoling people, threatening people, and they threatened people's spouses, and they threatened people's children even. I don't mean that they threatened the lives of these people's children or they threatened to put their children in jail, but they threatened to throw both parents in jail and let the children live in foster care, and they bragged about doing those things.
What's really disturbing to me about that is that in these white-collar cases, there's a massive amount of information already there, documents. I mean, you're talking about ordinary business transactions, ordinary communications with the public. And what happens is that once you start putting pressure on a witness, you can get a witness to take what is a very ordinary kind of transaction and put a sinister kind of cast on it.
Maybe the most interesting thing that this former prosecutor says is that they have this giant organization for prosecuting mobsters. They have this specific training, and all these prosecutors and all these investigators who are trained to prosecute mobsters and mafia bosses, and then that they were running out of mafia bosses and mobsters to prosecute.